Hello learners, you are welcome to this session. Today we are going to discuss about another important feature of environmental impact assessment, that is measurement of environmental impact assessment. Before going into the details of this one, we have to recapitulate that what we have studied so far about environmental impact assessment. We have studied that environmental impact assessment is a process which is a management intensive process, and it is also frequently deal with major projects. It is always involves in interdisciplinary team approach. Environmental impact statements shall be prepared using an interdisciplinary approach which will ensure the integrated use of the natural and social sciences and the environmental design arts. So, the disciplines of the proposers shall be appropriate to the scope and issues which are identified in the scoping approach. The interdisciplinary approach not only reflects the normal scope of environmental impact assessment studies from the biophysical to the socio-economic aspects, but also brings to the process the advantages of multiple viewpoints and perspectives on the complex issues involved. The team producing the environmental impact statement may be one or a combination of proponent in-house, lead external consultants, external sub-consultants, and also the individual specialist. Many environmental impact assessment teams make a clear distinction between core, or otherwise we can say that it is a focal management team, and also associated specialist, frequently reflecting the fact that no one organization can cover all the inputs which are required in the production of an environmental statement for a particular project. So, the team project manager obviously has an important role. In addition to personal and team management skills, the manager should have a broad appreciation of the project type under consideration and also a knowledge of the relevant process and impacts which are subjected to the environmental impact assessment, and also the ability to identify important issues and preferably a substantial area of expertise. The researchers identify the core roles for a project manager. That means selecting an appropriate project team is most important criteria, and managing specialist inputs, liaising with the people involved in the process, managing change in the internal and external environment of the project, and also coordinating the contributions of the team in the various documentary outputs. The management team has to coordinate resources also, that is the information, people and equipment, to achieve an environmental impact assessment study of quality, on time, and also within its budget limit. The time available may also vary, of course. The average is 4 to 6 months, but it could be much longer for complex projects. In interdisciplinary teamwork, 3 C's are required. They are complementarity, comparability, and coordination, which are particularly important. The importance of complementarity for the technical skills which are required to complete the task and of personal skills for those in the core management team. The factors which are important in the successful management of the interdisciplinary team, just few I would like to mention. That is a clear, concise statement of the mission or purpose of the team, a summary of the goals or milestones which the team has to be expected to accomplish in planning and conducting the environmental impact study, and a meaningful identification of the major tasks which are required to accomplish the team's purpose, with each task broken down by individual. A summary delineation of the strategy of the team relative to policies, programs, procedures, plans, budgets, and also the other resource allocation methods which are required in the conduct of the environmental impact study. A statement of the team's organizational design with information also includes on the roles and authorities, responsibilities of all the members of the team and also the team leader, and a clear delineation of human as well as the non-human resource support services which are available by the usage by the interdisciplinary team. So, environmental impact assessment is mainly about predicting and is required at the initial stages when the project, including alternatives, is being planned and designed, and this continues through the mitigation, monitoring and then auditing. From prediction to assessment of the relative significance of the impacts, the process of evaluation is compulsory followed. Only a part of the total range of components engaged with environmental impact assessment and can't be accessed or assessed successfully in segregation from winning social, economic, aesthetic and cultural conditions, which is demonstrated by the environmental components. Quite often, the drawback amongst biophysical effect and financial effect, which is critical in taking decision, is in the scenario. We can also say that attempts to find an answer for the question, do the changes matter? This is through evaluation. Both the significance connected to biological concerns and the assets which are liable to be accessible to moderate unfavorable effects or ensure imperative environmental components which are affected by these different variables. The concept of environmental assessment is consequently important to evaluate the results of progress for environmental components per se, that may be environmental impact significance, to give premise to examination with different classes of effect. Different effects must be optimized on the time of evaluation somehow and can be changed over to basic comparing the scales. If the utilization of the subjective assessment criteria is postponed until the last stage in the basic decision making or impact assessment process after any evaluation of effects that has been done, then bias in assessment is limited. So, appraisals of the impact significance ought to dispensably or dependably go before evaluation of impact significance. A correlation between a deliberate state, that is a following impact, and a reference standard, which may be an ideal state or a quality goal that may be related to impact significance evaluation. The hugeness of natural surroundings, that misfortune for an animal group, may in this way rely upon the connection between the living space accessibility and also species populance progression, and it may be conceivable to set up edges or norms mirroring the degree of living spaces misfortune that can be acknowledged before the reasonably of animal groups will be endangered. Then again, the significance of habitat loss depends likewise on the apparent estimation of the species which is being referred to, and habitat loss is also probably going to be viewed as more vital for species that are uncommon, undermined and also secured by law. So, it is important that if such criteria may be connected in a thorough and clear manner, and that is needed to be converted into effective regulatory action. So, evaluation of habitat methods are created in the United States in 1980 itself, that has been utilized auto-ecological data on the habitat necessities of species to characterize their base living space, prerequisites and evaluate the quality and measure of accessible habitat. Potential misfortunes of habitat as far as the both area as well as quality is concerned, and then be able to be modified by the arrangement of comparable environment with a specific goal to guarantee that objective or esteemed species are saved. The techniques center around the count of habitat sustainability indices that express the proportion between the habitat conditions which are given by an investigation territory to an assessment species and its ideal habitat conditions. And also it is increased by the region of accessible habitat, keeping in mind the end goal to compute habitat units that can be later balanced based on ranking criteria which incorporate shortage, vulnerability and also replaceability. It is believable to examine when conditions against a typical standard are recorded by determining biological expectations for health frameworks or ideal framework states. For freshwater frameworks in United States of America, indices of biotic integrity, it has been utilized successfully. Like files can be arranged into a local setting by relegating local reference habitats, and much of the time the utilization of such strategies is constrained by absence of data on the habitat prerequisites of species. Least suitable size of habitat is well known for invertebrates. Moreover, in exceptionally anthropogenic and fragmented regions, it can be extremely hard to decide the ideal environment prerequisites of the species. In such regions where wild zones are profoundly confined, of course, there had been a tendency to be considerably more accentuation on the identification, choice, safeguarding of remaining, and also essential locals for the nature preservation purposes. In many nations, misfortunes of natural life living space have just been extensive to the point that the capacity to find substitution habitat is to a great degree constrained. So now with this recapitulation, now we are moving to the measurements of the environmental impact assessments. So first I would like to discuss with generic steps to measure environmental impact assessment. In that, it is a process, we all know that so far we have understood, that makes sure that environmental issues that are raised when a project or a plan is first discussed and that all concerns are addressed as a project gains momentum through the course to the implementation. So recommendations made by the environmental impact assessment that may be necessitate the redesign of some project components which require further measurement of environmental impact assessment and suggest some changes which alter the economic viability of the project or cause a delay in project implementation. To be of most benefit, it is essential that an environmental assessment that is carried out to determine significant impacts early in the project cycle so that recommendations can be built into the design and cost benefit analysis also without causing major delays, or we can also say that increased design costs. It also effective once implementation has commenced. The environmental impact assessment should lead to a mechanism whereby adequate monitoring is undertaken to realize environmental management. I want to emphasize here it is important output from the environmental impact assessment process that should be the delineation of enabling mechanisms for effective management. So the way in which the environmental impact assessment is carried out is not at all rigid. It is a process that comprises so many series of steps. These steps are outlined as the techniques are more commonly used, which are described in detail of this one in this session. The main generic steps which are involved in the environmental impact assessment process are: the first one is screening, the second one is scoping, third one is prediction and mitigation management and monitoring, and the fourth one is audit. If we will discuss the very first step, that is a screening. So screening tells about whether an EIA is required or not. Frequently, the results in a categorization of the project, and also from this a decision is made on whether or not a full environmental impact assessment is to be carried out or not. So the project plan is screened for scale of investment, location and type of development, and if the project needs statutory clearance. The number of projects that could be subject to environmental impact assessment is potentially very large, but many projects have no substantial or significant environmental impact. So a screening mechanism which requires to focus on those projects with potentially significant adverse environmental impacts or whose impacts are not fully known. That means environmental impact assessment is not for all major projects. Those with few or no impacts are screened out and allowed to proceed to the normal planning permission and starting up early stages administrative procedures without any additional assessment or any additional loss of time or expense. So screening can be partly determined by the environmental impact assessment regulation that is operating in a country at the time of an assessment. So advantages as well as thresholds, if you will see that it is simple to use, place arbitrary, inflexible rules and also on a variable environment unless it is tired, 1 tire, 2 tire, 3 tires, and also it is quick to use, and more certainly there is a less room for common sense or good judgment, and consistent between locations, maybe or become inconsistent with the relevant neighbors, and consistent between decisions within locations, and difficult to set, and also once set difficult to change. So consistent between project type, also that leads to a proliferation of projects which are lying just below the threshold levels. If you will look into the case by case, that allows common sense and good judgment, it is likely to be complex and also ambiguous. Flexible in the sense it can incorporate variety in project and environment, likely to be slow and costly, and also can evolve easily and open to abuse by decision makers because of potential or financial interests. And sometimes it is open to poor judgment of decision makers that is likely to be swayed by the precedent and therefore lose flexibility. In general, there are two main approaches to screening: the use of thresholds that involves placing projects in categories and setting thresholds for each project type. These may relate in an example way. I would like to provide this one. To project, for example, characteristics that is 20 hectares or otherwise it is above 20 hectares. To anticipated projects impacts, what are that? The production of more than 20,000 or more than 30,000 tons or more of waste per annum to be taken from a site, and also from the project location, that is a designated landscape area. So a case by case approach involves the appraisal of the characteristic of the project as they are submitted for screening against a checklist of the guidelines and criteria. And next comes to the scoping. The scoping provides that which impacts and issues to be considered for this environmental impact assessment. So scoping is the process of determining which are the most critical issues to study and will involve community participation to some degree or not. And also it is this early stage that environmental impact assessment can most strongly influence the outline proposal, the project's potential impacts, zone of impacts, mitigation possibilities, and need for monitoring. The scope of an environmental impact assessment is the impact and issues it addresses. The process of scoping is that of deciding from all of project's possible impacts and also from all the alternatives that could be addressed, which are the significant ones. So, an initial scoping of the possible impacts may identify those impacts thought to be potentially significant and also those thought to be not significant and those whose significance is unclear. So, these are the three criteria we have to follow for the scoping. And also further study should be there for the examine the impacts in the various categories. Sometimes it is confirmed by such a study to be not significant or eliminated at the early stage itself. The categories are added to the initial category of other potentially significant impacts. So, the refining of focus onto the most significant impacts that will definitely continues throughout the environmental impact process. So, scoping is generally carried out in discussion between the developer, the component authority and other relevant agencies, ideally the public, those who are affected directly. So, it is also frequently the first stage of negotiations and consultations between the developer and other interested parties. It is an important step in environmental impact assessment because it enables the limited resources of the team preparing an environmental impact assessment to be allocated to best efficient and also prevents misunderstanding between the parties concerned. Here parties means the proposers as well as the general public, those who are directly affected by the adverse impacts of that proposed project, about the information required in an EIS, that is an environmental impact statement. Scoping can also identify issues that should later be monitored. So, it should begin with the identification of individuals, communities, local authorities and statutory consultees likely to be affected by the project. Here good practice comes into the picture. Good practice would be to bring them together in a working group and also meetings with the developer. Detailed prediction and mitigation studies followed by the scoping and are carried out in parallel with feasibility studies. The main output report is called an environmental impact statement that contains a detailed plan for managing and monitoring environmental impacts both during as well as after implementation of that project. Finally, an audit of environmental impact process is carried out sometime after implementation. So the audit, we know that it serves as a useful feedback and learning function, positive and negative, reversible and irreversible, and temporary and permanent impacts which are required to be predicted, which purposes a good understanding of the project by the assessment agency. Dear learner, so far we have studied some of the measurements, how to measure environmental impact assessment. In that, we have completed screening and scoping. You must have understood the entire significance of screening as well as scoping. So in the next class, we will come up with some of the measurement of environmental impact assessment methods. Thank you.